So the fanciful idea that the ancient Greeks travelled to the Americas has resurfaced again in a number of Hellenic publications. Based on some passages from the far later and Roman historian Plutarch in his De Facie, researchers believe Greek sailors made the treacherous transatlantic crossing in their triremes under sail and oar power some 1,000 years or more before Leif Erikson's voyage and nearly 1,500 years before Columbus crossed the ocean. They cited evidence to show how these unlikely and recurrent voyages could have happened, so this video will look at that evidence and the historical sources to see how likely it was. The research by Ioannis Liritsis, an archaeologist at the University of the Aegean and colleagues, is explained in the paper Does Astronomical and Geographical Information of Plutarch's De Facie Describe a Trip Beyond the North Atlantic Ocean? It was originally published in the Journal of Coastal Research in 2018. The paper's abstract reads, in Plutarch's book on the apparent face in the orb of the moon, the interlocutors develop a dialogue about a trip to the great continent beyond the North Atlantic Ocean. By applying modern scientific data, the present reappraisal of the astronomical and geographical elements within this dialogue has produced a novel interpretation of the date and place of the meeting and a journey to the Northern Atlantic Ocean. A described solar eclipse is dated to AD 75, making use of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration NASA Espinac-Meas list, as well as historical information. The described peculiar recurrent trips take place every 30 years, when the planet Saturn reaches the Taurus constellation, from the Mediterranean Sea to the Cronian Open Sea, which is identified with the Northern Atlantic Ocean coasts. It has been suggested that the last mission had returned homeland in April AD 56. The information provided concerns distances between coastal sites and islands, duration of sea paths in days, and the reported setting and size between the destination place and its gulf with regards to Azov in Crimea and the Caspian Sea. Implications of sea currents and the coastal geomorphology of those lands are given, following strictly the Gulf Stream current, as well as other known sea currents in the Northern Atlantic Ocean, and introducing estimated speed for the ship. The geographical location of destination of the Greek settlers is proposedly identified with St. Lawrence Gulf and Newfoundland Island. Other unnamed islands mentioned in this dialogue are identified with Norway's islands, Azores, Iceland, Greenland, and Baffin Islands. It has been shown that the journey is made with good knowledge of sea currents, but by using bright stars and stellar configurations as astronomical nightscape markers that determine the exact orientation of the sailing toward the Iberian Peninsula and back to the eastern Mediterranean, making the current working hypothesis a plausible event. The researchers believe the evidence shows that temporary outposts were set up by the Greeks in the New World where they mined gold. The source for this hypothesis, Plutarch's De Facie, features Socratic-style dialogues between a number of characters. In it, they discuss whether the moon is another Earth, whether there is life on the moon, and other philosophical questions. A character recounts meeting a stranger who had recently returned from a long voyage to a distant great continent. According to the character, new travellers would make the trip to this far-off land around every 30 years, when the planet Saturn appeared in the constellation Taurus. Some were said to have remained behind on the continent, and some would have returned. Based on this and astronomical research, Liritsis and his fellow academics claimed that the mystery great continent was North America. In the paper, the researchers claim the Greeks could have used their intricate knowledge of astronomy to pinpoint the locations of Atlantic currents that could have carried them westwards to the New World. Hector Williams, a professor of classical archaeology at the University of British Columbia, played down the possibility of Greek sailors reaching the continent, however, at least on purpose. He said, while accidental pre-Columbian crossings are not impossible for Greeks and, more likely, Romans, who were caught in a storm while on the coast of Western Europe, there is no evidence for regular crossings. Even the Vikings gave up their brief settlement in Newfoundland after a few years. This was in no small part due to conflict with the Native American inhabitants, whom the Norse settlers referred to as Skraelings, but these factors appear to have left the research team undeterred. Let us turn to the father of Greek history, Herodotus, for the more likely extent of ancient Greek knowledge. Herodotus, circa 484 to circa 425 BC, wrote of the mythical Hyperborea and the British Isles, which were referred to as the Tin Islands, in reference to the abundance of the metal in the islands. Tin was of paramount importance to the Greeks in the manufacture of Bronze Age weapons and other items. In his The Histories, written in 430 BC, he wrote of the Tin Islands and northwestern Europe. About as far west as Europe I have no definite information, for I cannot accept the story of a river called by non-Greek peoples the Eridanus, which flows into the Northern Sea, where our amber is supposed to come from, nor do I know anything of the existence of islands called the Tin Islands, whence we get our tin. In the first place, the name Eridanus is obviously not foreign but Greek, and was invented by some poet or other, and secondly, in spite of my efforts to do so, I have never found anyone who could give me first-hand information of the existence of a sea beyond Europe to the north and west, yet it cannot be disputed that tin and amber do come to us from what we might call the ends of the earth. It is clear that it is the northern parts of Europe which are richest in gold, but how it is procured I cannot say exactly. The story goes that the one-eyed Arimaspians steal it from the griffins who guard it. Personally, however, I refuse to believe in one-eyed men who in other respects are like the rest of men. In any case, it does seem to be true that the countries which lie on the circumference of the inhabited world produce the things which we believe to be most rare and beautiful. Further considering the lands to the north of the Hellenic world, he recalled a poem by Aristeas and wrote of the mythical Hyperborea. Beyond the Isodones live the one-eyed Arimaspians, and beyond them the griffins which guard the gold, and beyond the griffins the Hyperboreans whose land comes down to the sea. All these, except the Hyperboreans, were continually encroaching upon one another's territory, beginning with the Arimaspians. So the Isodones were expelled by the Arimaspians, the Scythians by the Isodones, and the Cimmerians by the Scythians, who forced them from their homes along the shores of the Black Sea. Later, in the same source, he added, of the Hyperboreans we get no information from the Scythians, or anyone else in that part of the world, except perhaps from the Isodones. Not that the Isodones really tell us anything, in my opinion, for if they did, we should have heard it from the Scythians too, like the story of the one-eyed men. He also recounted a story about the alleged Hyperborean traveller called Abaris. John Wood the Elder, an 18th century architect based in the ancient city of Bath in England, suggested that Abaris, who was a healer, could have been Bladud, mythical Celtic king of the Britons. The outlandish theory is light on evidence, but raises the prospect of Britain being the fabled Hyperborea of classical Greek legend. Despite the histories being very much a product of its time and therefore featuring outlandish mythological entities, it would make sense for Herodotus to include reference to a great continent to the west. But no such mention is made, even among descriptions of one-eyed warriors, griffins, and other odd creatures throughout the texts. Oddly enough, the association of griffins with Scythia may have a ring of truth. This is despite the fact that griffins are fantastical and mythological beasts, albeit ones that have persisted across the Western world in heraldic iconography and dating back thousands of years in classical stories. Legends of griffins were borne out to some degree by the discovery of fossilized remains of protoceratops dinosaurs in what was Scythia. These extinct reptiles were smaller and non-horned relatives of the perhaps better-known Triceratops. Folklorist Adrian Mayer of Stanford University pointed to highly preserved fossil skeletons of Protoceratops, which were discovered by ancient nomadic Scythians. These startling beaked skeletons would rightly have left the finders unable to explain their discovery and reaching, inevitably, for monsters to understand them. They could easily have appeared as having a bird-like head and hindquarters of a lion as the classic griffin form is presented. The presence of Hyperborea being close to Scythia could also be seen as an allusion or folk memory to the Proto-Indo-European homeland in the steppe. So Herodotus writes at length about what lies to the north and east of the Greek world, but is very scant on detail of what may be to the west. So with all this in mind, do you think the ancient Greeks made it to North America? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and most importantly subscribe. Thanks for watching.